What would you do if a billion-dollar airline told you your life was a safety hazard? Meet Terrence Brooks. He didn't just get denied a seat. He was humiliated in front of a packed terminal, mocked by a pilot, and left stranded because of his wheelchair. But the airline made one fatal mistake. They didn't check who Terrence's brother was. Within 24 hours, the CEO wasn't just apologizing. He was watching his most profitable flight route vanish from the radar forever. This isn't just a story of discrimination. It's the most expensive lesson in karma ever recorded in aviation history. The air in Terminal 4 of JFK International was thick with the scent of overpriced espresso and the frantic energy of the holiday rush. Terrence Brooks sat quietly in his customized titanium wheelchair, a sleek piece of engineering that cost more than most used cars. He was a man of quiet dignity, a retired civil engineer who had spent 30 years building the very bridges people drove over without a second thought. Today, he was just a passenger, or at least, he was trying to be. He was headed to London Heathrow on Skylink Airways Flight 88, the Executive Express. It was a premier route known for its champagne service and lie-flat beds. Terrence had saved his miles for 2 years to surprise his daughter for her graduation. Next, a voice snapped. Terrence rolled forward to the gate desk. The agent, a woman named Brenda Whitmore, didn't look up from her screen. Her ID badge was slightly crooked, and her expression was one of permanent exhaustion turned into a weapon. "Passport and boarding pass," she muttered. Terrence handed them over with a smile. "Good morning. I've already pre-cleared my chair with the disability desk. It's a dry cell, non-spillable battery, and I have the certificate right here." Brenda finally looked up. Her eyes didn't go to his face. They went to the wheels of his chair. She let out a long, audible sigh. "We have a problem." "A problem?" Terrence asked, his voice steady. "I've flown this route 3 times in the last 5 years. Everything is in the system." "The system is wrong," Brenda said, sliding his passport back across the counter like it was a piece of trash. "Captain Sloan just did his walkthrough. He's decided the cargo hold is too full for specialized equipment. We can't take the chair." Terrence felt a familiar heat rising in his chest, but he kept his cool. "The law requires you to accommodate mobility devices, Miss Whitmore, especially on an international flight of this duration. My chair is my legs. If the chair doesn't fly, I don't fly." Brenda leaned forward, her voice dropping to a condescending whisper. "Exactly. You aren't flying. We can rebook you on a partner flight in 3 days. Maybe 3 days? My daughter graduates tomorrow." Terrence's voice rose, drawing the attention of the business travelers in line behind him. "This is a confirmed booking. I checked in 4 hours early." At that moment, a tall man in a crisp pilot's uniform stepped out from the jet bridge. This was Captain Sterling Sloan, a man whose ego was reportedly larger than the Boeing 777 he commanded. He adjusted his cap and looked at Terrence with a mixture of pity and annoyance. "Is there an issue here, Brenda?" Sloan asked. "The passenger is insisting on loading the oversized chair," Brenda replied. "Captain, I told him the hold is at capacity with priority cargo." Sloan looked at Terrence, then at the line of wealthy passengers watching the scene. "Look, Mr. Brooks, is it? It's a safety issue. If we have an emergency, your equipment complicates things. Plus, my ground crew doesn't have the time to secure a rig like that today. We're on a tight window for our Atlantic slot." "It's not equipment," Terrence said, his knuckles whitening as he gripped his armrests. "It's a wheelchair. And you're refusing me boarding because of a window. That's a violation of the Air Carrier Access Act." Sloan chuckled, a dry, metallic sound. "You can cite all the acts you want. On this aircraft, I am the final authority. You're a liability today. Brenda, clear the line. We're boarding Group 1. "You can't do this," Terrence said, his voice trembling now, not with fear, but with the sheer weight of the indignity. "I just did," Sloan replied, turning his back. As Brenda began scanning the passes of the first-class passengers, She leaned over and whispered one last thing to Terence. "People like you should really stick to the trains. It's less of a headache for everyone." Terence sat in the middle of the bustling terminal as the gate door slammed shut. He was a black man in a wheelchair, left in the wake of a priority world that deemed him a nuisance. He watched through the glass as the Skylink jet pushed back from the gate. But Terence didn't call a taxi. He didn't cry. Instead, he pulled out his phone and dialed a private number. "Hey, Dominic," Terence said when the call picked up. "I'm at JFK. Skylink just bumped me. Captain Sterling Sloan. He said I was a liability. Yeah, I have it all on record." On the other end of the line, Dominic Brooks, the most feared maritime and aviation litigator in the Northeast, silenced a room full of junior partners. "Terence," Dominic said, his voice cold enough to freeze the Atlantic, "don't leave the airport. Go to the VIP lounge. I'm calling the Port Authority and the Department of Transportation. By tomorrow morning, Sterling Sloan won't have a plane to fly." The karma wasn't just coming. It was already fueled up and taxiing toward the runway. The jet engines of Skylink Flight 88 roared to life, a low-frequency vibration that rattled the terminal glass. Terence Brooks watched the silver bird pull away, carrying his luggage, his dreams of seeing his daughter walk across the stage in London, and a pilot who thought he was untouchable. But Terence wasn't alone for long. Within 20 minutes, the quiet of the executive lounge was broken by the sharp click of Italian leather shoes. Dominic Brooks arrived not with a suitcase, but with a sleek carbon fiber briefcase and 2 assistants trailing behind him like destroyers flanking a battleship. "They did what?" Dominic asked, his eyes scanning the gate area. He didn't look like a man you'd want to cross. He was younger than Terence, sharper, with a suit that cost more than a mid-sized sedan and a reputation for dismantling corporations in open court. "Captain Sterling Sloan," Terence said, his voice now a low, dangerous rumble. He told the gate agent, Brenda Whitmore, that my chair was a safety hazard. He said they didn't have time to secure equipment like this because of their Atlantic slot. Dominic pulled out a tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. "Skylink 88, JFK to Heathrow, a high-yield route. Sloan has a history, Terence. I've seen his name in 2 other ADA-related complaints that were quietly settled out of court. He thinks he's the king of the sky. He told me I should stick to the trains," Terence added. Dominic stopped. He looked at his brother, then at the empty gate where the Executive Express had just vanished. A cold, predatory smile spread across his face. "Oh, Sterling, you didn't just deny boarding to a passenger. You just committed a felony under the 1986 Air Carrier Access Act. And you did it with witnesses." Dominic turned to his lead assistant, Sarah Jenkins. "Sarah, I want the manifest for Flight 88. Not just the passengers. I want the cargo manifest." Sloan said the hold was at capacity. "I want to know exactly what was more important than a human being's mobility." While Terence and Dominic were strategizing in the lounge, 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, Captain Sterling Sloan was leaning back in his cockpit seat, sipping a freshly brewed espresso. "Smooth air today," his first officer, Mark Gable, remarked. "Shame about that guy at the gate, though. We could have made the chair fit if we just shifted those crates in Pit 3. Sloan waved a hand dismissively. "Gable, you're new. You'll learn. Those crates in Pit 3 are special category. They belong to Vanderbilt Logistics. High priority. Time-sensitive medical tech. If we delay for a wheelchair, we lose the bonus for an on-time arrival. One guy in a chair doesn't move the needle. Vanderbilt's contract moves the entire airline's stock price. But the law is a suggestion when you're over the ocean," Sloan snapped. "Keep your eyes on the heading." But back on the ground, the needle was moving fast. Dominic Brooks wasn't just a lawyer. He was a board member for the Global Aviation Safety Oversight, GASO, a private watchdog group that worked closely with the FAA. He knew things other lawyers didn't. By 3 p.m., Dominic had the cargo manifest. He stared at the screen, his brow furrowing. Vanderbilt Logistics, Pit 3. 600 pounds of medical-grade silicon components. Is that a problem? Terence asked. It's a lie, Dominic whispered. Vanderbilt Logistics doesn't ship medical silicon out of JFK on Sundays. They ship it out of Newark on Tuesdays. I know their CEO, Arthur Vanderbilt. He's a client. Dominic pulled his phone out and made a call. Arthur, it's Dominic. Quick question. Do you have a shipment on Skylink 88 today? Medical silicon. There was a pause. Then Arthur's voice came through, loud and clear. Dominic, no. We haven't used Skylink in 6 months. Their rates are too high and their pilots are arrogant. Why do you ask? Dominic's eyes lit up. Because Captain Sloan just told my brother he couldn't board because your priority cargo took up the space. If you aren't shipping, then what's in those crates? I'll check my tracking logs, Arthur said, sounding offended. If someone is using my company's name to bypass cargo inspections, I'll burn that airline to the ground myself. 10 minutes later, the twist arrived. Arthur called back, his voice trembling with rage. Dominic, I just looked into the terminal's digital signature. Those crates? They weren't from me. They were registered to a shell company called Apex Aviation Services. Do you know who owns Apex? Dominic felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Who? The CEO of Skylink, Richard Thorne. And get this, the cargo wasn't medical silicon. According to a leaked manifest from the ground crew, it was 300 cases of vintage wine and high-end furniture being moved to Thorne's private estate in the UK. Terence gasped. They kicked me off the plane for furniture. Not just furniture, Dominic said, his voice dropping an octave. They committed fraud. They falsified a federal cargo manifest to prioritize the CEO's luxury goods over a disabled passenger's legal right to travel. This isn't just a lawsuit anymore, Terence. This is a criminal conspiracy. Dominic stood up, buttoning his blazer. Sarah, call the Port Authority Police and the FAA's Enforcement Division. Tell them we have evidence of cargo misdeclaration and weight and balance fraud on Flight 88. And call the media. I want Rebecca Stone from the New York Times on the line. What are you going to do? Terence asked. Dominic looked at the departure board, where Flight 88 was still listed as in flight. I'm going to make sure that when Sterling Sloan lands in London, he isn't met by a limo. He's going to be met by a team of inspectors and a fleet of news cameras. And then, I'm going to shut down this entire route. Can you do that? Dominic smiled. In aviation, if you lie about what's in the belly of the plane to save a buck or move a sofa, you don't just get a fine, you lose your license to fly that route. Skylink makes $40 million a month on the JFK Heathrow run. Tomorrow, that number is going to be 0. As Skylink Flight 88 cruised at 38,000 feet, Captain Sterling Sloan was feeling invincible. He'd just finished a high-end steak from the first-class galley and was discussing his upcoming bonus with Gable. He had no idea that back on the ground, a digital net was tightening around his neck. In New York, Dominic Brooks was a whirlwind of calculated destruction. He wasn't just filing a lawsuit, he was orchestrating a multi-agency pincer maneuver. He sat in his glass-walled office, the lights of Manhattan shimmering behind him, while his associate Sarah Jenkins coordinated with the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, and the Department of Transportation. We have the confirmation, Dominic, Sarah said, slamming a file onto his desk. The cargo manifest for Pit 3 was hand-signed by Brenda Whitmore at the gate, but the digital weight sensors from the ground crew show a discrepancy of 400 pounds. That's not medical silicon. That's wood and glass. It's furniture, just like Arthur Vanderbilt suspected. Dominic picked up the phone. He didn't call the airline's customer service. He called Richard Thorne, the CEO of Skylink, directly on his private line. Thorne answered on the third ring, his voice dripping with the confidence of a man who owned the sky. "Dominic, to what do I owe the pleasure? Planning a vacation?" "Actually, Richard, I'm planning a funeral," Dominic said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Specifically, the funeral of your JFK Heathrow route." There was a sharp silence on the other end. "I don't follow." "You denied boarding to my brother, Terrence Brooks, today. He's a disabled man and a retired engineer. Your pilot, Sterling Sloan, told him there was no room for his wheelchair because of priority cargo. But we both know that cargo was your personal antique collection being smuggled to your London estate on a commercial ticket." Thorne's voice lost its warmth instantly. "You have no proof of that, and even if you did, a diverted passenger is a civil matter. We'll send him a voucher. Don't waste my time. It's not a civil matter when you falsify federal documents, Richard. That's a felony. And since you used a commercial flight to transport private goods under a fraudulent business name, you've violated the International Air Transport Association, IATA, safety protocols. I've already contacted the FAA. They are classifying Flight 88 as an unverified cargo risk." Thorne's breath hitched. "You wouldn't." "I already did. Check your flight tracker, Richard. Your Executive Express just got a very interesting radio call." Back in the cockpit of Flight 88, the calm was shattered by a high-priority alert on the ACARS, Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System. Captain Sloan frowned as the thermal printer spat out a message. He read it, and his face went from tan to a sickly pale grey. "Message from Gander Oceanic Control. Flight SK 88. Be advised. FAR enforcement has issued a security discrepancy on cargo manifest. You are ordered to proceed to Heathrow under monitored status. Upon landing, aircraft is to be taxied to remote stand 44. No passengers or crew are to debark until Port Authority and Customs inspection is complete." "What the hell is this?" Gable whispered. "Remote stand 44. That's where they take planes with bomb threats or biohazards." Sloane's hands trembled on the yoke. "It's not a threat. It's that guy, the one in the chair. He must have friends." "Captain, if they inspect Pit 3, we're dead," Gable said, his voice rising in panic. "The manifest says silicon. If they find the CEO's mahogany desk and wine crates, that's a federal crime. We signed off on those weights." Sloan looked out at the dark Atlantic below. He was 5 hours from London, and for the first time in his 30-year career, he was terrified of landing. He tried to call Skylink HQ, but his frequency was blocked. Dominic Brooks had used his connections to place the flight under a regulatory hold. The airline's own communications were being bypassed. Meanwhile, at JFK, the hard karma was already hitting the ground crew. Brenda Whitmore was sitting in the break room, laughing with a co-worker about the guy who thought he could sue an airline when 4 Port Authority police officers walked in. "Brenda Whitmore?" the lead officer asked. "Yes," she said, her smile faltering. "You're being detained for questioning regarding the falsification of a federal flight manifest and violations of the Air Carrier Access Act. Please come with us." As she was led through the terminal in handcuffs, past the very gate where she had mocked Terrence, a news crew from Channel 7 News was already filming. The headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen started to read, "Skylink Scandal. CEO's luxury goods. Displace disabled passenger." Terrence Brooks sat in the lounge watching the broadcast. He looked at Dominic. "Is this really happening?" "It's only the beginning," Dominic said. "By the time that plane touches down in London, Skylink stock is going to be in a freefall, and Richard Thorne is going to have to choose between his airline and his freedom." But the biggest twist was yet to come, because in Pit 3, hidden inside one of the antique crates, was something far more incriminating than just wine and furniture, something Richard Thorne hadn't even told his pilot about. The descent into London Heathrow was unlike any Captain Sterling Sloane had ever experienced. Usually, Flight 88 was the golden goose, given priority vectors and the shortest path to the gate. But tonight, the air traffic controllers at Swanwick were cold. Skylink 88, descend to 6,000 feet. Hold it, Ockham, the voice crackled. Heathrow, we are low on fuel reserves after that headwind. We need a direct approach, Sloane argued, his voice cracking. Negative. Skylink 88. You are under a regulatory hold. Maintain holding pattern. We have a ground team mobilizing at remote stand 44. You are not cleared for the main terminal. In the cabin, the elite passengers, CEOs, fashion moguls, and diplomats were growing restless. The Executive Express was circling the dark suburbs of London like a ghost ship. Mark Gable, the first officer, looked at the cargo camera feed on his secondary display. Captain, the pressure sensor in pit 3 is fluctuating. If they open those crates and find out we've been hauling the CEO's private stash while leaving a disabled passenger on the tarmac, we're losing our wings. Both of us. Shut up, Gable, Sloane hissed. Thorne promised me a promotion for handling the logistics on this route. He'll protect us. But Richard Thorne wasn't protecting anyone. Back in New York, the CEO was currently watching his legal team scramble as Dominic Brooks filed an emergency injunction in the Southern District of New York. The route is dead, Richard, Dominic said over a speakerphone in a room full of federal agents. The FAA just issued a preliminary stop order. As of this moment, Skylink is prohibited from operating the JFK Heathrow corridor, pending a full investigation into weight and balance fraud. You're overreaching, Brooks, Thorne screamed. One wheelchair doesn't shut down a $500 million a year route. It does when that wheelchair was bumped to make room for contraband, Dominic replied. And I'm not talking about your wine, Richard. At 4:15 a.m. GMT, Skylink 88 finally touched down. The landing was hard, a jarring thud that echoed through the nearly empty cabin. Instead of taxiing towards the glowing lights of Terminal 5, the plane was led by two yellow Follow Me trucks to a desolate corner of the airport, surrounded by high-intensity floodlights. As the engines cut out, the silence was deafening. Then came the blue and red flashes. Not just the Metropolitan Police, but the UK Civil Aviation Authority, CAA, and HM Revenue and Customs. Sloane opened the cockpit door to find a wall of stone-faced officers. I want to speak to my company representative, he demanded, trying to summon his usual bravado. Captain Sloane, a lead inspector named Callum Reed said, stepping forward. You are being detained for questioning regarding a breach of the International Air Carriage Act and suspected cargo smuggling. Ground crews are currently opening Pit 3. Sloane's heart hammered against his ribs. It's just furniture. The CEO's furniture. Is it? Reed asked, a grim smile playing on his lips. Because we just ran a thermal scan on those crates. Furniture doesn't have a heartbeat. The twist hit Sloane like a physical blow. He turned to Gable, who looked just as horrified. They watched the monitors as the ground crew pried open the largest antique armoire crate from Pit 3. Inside, huddled in blankets and surrounded by oxygen canisters, were two people. They weren't antiques. They were high-level corporate defectors from a rival tech firm in the US, being smuggled out of the country to avoid a federal subpoena, hidden under the guise of the CEO's personal belongings. Richard Thorne hadn't just used the plane as a moving van, he had used it for human trafficking to protect his business interests. And he had kicked Terence Brooks off the plane because a wheelchair and its specialized battery required a mandatory manual inspection of the cargo, hold an inspection that would have revealed the hidden compartment and the people inside. The news broke globally within the hour. The wheelchair that toppled an empire. Terence Brooks sat in his home in Brooklyn, his daughter on FaceTime from London. Both of them were crying as they watched the live feed of Captain Sloane being led away in zip ties. He said I was a liability, honey, Terence whispered to his daughter. He said I didn't belong on that plane. You belonged there more than anyone, Dad, she sobbed. And now he'll never fly again. Dominic Brooks walked into the room, holding a glass of scotch and a stack of legal documents. The DOT just finalized the order, Terence. Skylink's JFK Heathrow license has been revoked, effective immediately. The route is shut down overnight. Their stock just hit a 20-year low. They're filing for Chapter 11 by noon. What about the CEO? Terence asked. Richard Thorne was arrested 10 minutes ago at his Greenwich estate, Dominic said. And the best part? The judge denied bail. He's being held in the same type of cell he tried to put those defectors in. But the hard karma wasn't finished. There was one more person who had yet to pay the price, the woman at the gate who started it all. While the CEO and the captain were being processed in high-security precincts, the woman who had started the domino effect with a sneer and a no was currently trying to scrub her digital footprint. Brenda Whitmore sat in her cramped apartment in Queens, her hands shaking as she refreshed the news. The headline on CNN read, "Skylink gate agent under investigation for human trafficking complicity." I didn't know, she screamed at the screen. I just did what the captain told me. But the hard karma of the legal system doesn't care about just following orders, especially when those orders involve a federal crime. By 10 a.m. the next morning, the Skylink terminal at JFK was a ghost town. The once bustling Executive Express check-in counters were cordoned off with yellow police tape. Thousands of passengers were being diverted to Delta and United. But for Brenda Whitmore, there was no diversion. There was a loud, rhythmic pounding on her apartment door. Federal Bureau of Investigation, open up. Brenda opened the door to find two agents, Special Agent Hayes and Special Agent Vance, standing there with a search warrant. We've recovered the internal messaging logs from your terminal at Gate B22, Agent Hayes said, stepping into the living room. Do you want to tell us about the priority cargo override you manually entered at 11:45 a.m. yesterday? I was told the hold was full, Brenda stammered. The logs show something else, Brenda, Hayes countered, holding up a printout. 20 minutes before Terence Brooks arrived, you received a message from Captain Sloan's iPad. It said, CEO's special units are loaded. Deny all heavy mobility devices. Use safety as the pretext. I'll back you up. And your response was, copy that. I'll make sure the guy in the chair gets the message. People like him shouldn't be on this route anyway. Brenda's face drained of all color. That was just a joke. Office talk. In a federal investigation involving the smuggling of corporate defectors, office talk is called conspiracy, Hayes said. And because you specifically targeted a disabled passenger to facilitate that smuggling, you're also being charged under the Hate Crimes Prevention Act. As Brenda was led out of her building in handcuffs, her neighbors, many of whom she had snubbed for years, watched with their phones out. The video of the meanest gate agent in JFK being hauled away went viral within minutes. The internet, fueled by the indignity Terence Brooks had suffered, was not merciful. Back at the Brooks household, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Dominic Brooks sat at the kitchen table, his laptop open to the Skylink bankruptcy filing. They're done, Terence, Dominic said. The UK Civil Aviation Authority has officially banned Skylink from British airspace for the next 5 years. Without the London route, their debt-to-equity ratio has collapsed. The board of directors is suing Richard Thorne for gross negligence. And the people in the crates? Terence asked. They're in protective custody. Turns out they were whistleblowers from Aerotech Systems. They were going to testify that Skylink's newer planes had faulty wing spar bolts. Thorne was trying to get them out of the country before the grand jury could subpoena them. If you had boarded that plane, Terence, and your chair had been inspected, they would have caught it all right there at JFK. Terence leaned back in his chair, a strange sense of peace washing over him. So by kicking me off, they actually ensured they got caught. Exactly, Dominic smiled. If they had just been decent human beings and let you fly, the defectors probably would have made it to London unnoticed. Their own prejudice was the tripwire that brought the whole house down. But the biggest blow was yet to come. Because Dominic wasn't just a lawyer, he was a master of the public nuke. He had organized a press conference for that afternoon, not at a courthouse, but right in front of the Skylink headquarters. A sea of microphones waited. Terence Brooks sat in his wheelchair, dressed in his best suit, looking every bit the dignified engineer he was. Dominic stood beside him. Today, Dominic addressed the cameras. We are filing a class action lawsuit on behalf of every passenger whose safety was compromised by Skylink's fraudulent cargo practices. But more importantly, we are announcing the Terence Brooks Foundation for Accessible Travel. He paused, looking directly into the lens. The $150 million settlement we are seeking from Skylink's remaining assets will go entirely toward ensuring that no disabled person is ever told they are a liability again. And to Captain Sterling Sloan, who is currently awaiting trial in a London cell. You said my brother should stick to the trains. Well, Sterling, since you've been stripped of your pilot's license for life, I hope you enjoy the bus ride to the courthouse. The reporters erupted in questions, but Terence just looked up at the sky. A plane was flying overhead. A different airline. A different route. He hadn't made it to his daughter's graduation in person, but he had done something much bigger. He had cleared the skies of a predator. The investigation into Skylink Flight 88 had long since transcended the boundaries of a domestic dispute or a simple, albeit egregious, case of disability discrimination. What had begun as a localized incident of prejudice at a JFK boarding gate had mutated into a high-stakes forensic excavation that spanned 2 continents. While the CEO of the airline, Richard Thorne, was being systematically dismantled by federal interrogators in a cold room in New York regarding his role in human trafficking and the smuggling of corporate defectors, a much darker, more personal brand of hard karma was preparing to descend with crushing final force upon Captain Sterling Sloan in London. At Heathrow's remote stand 44, an isolated, wind-swept patch of tarmac designed for the containment of threats, the specialized forensics team from the Metropolitan Police's Economic Crime Unit had already moved past the crates containing the terrified whistleblowers. The Boeing 777 was no longer a marvel of aviation engineering. It was a sprawling, pressurized crime scene. Every inch of the aircraft, from the avionics bay to the rear galley, was being mapped with laser precision. Inspector Callum Reed, a man whose career was built on the meticulous deconstruction of international smuggling rings, stood in the cavernous belly of the aircraft. The cargo hold was bathed in the harsh, flickering glow of portable floodlights. He watched as a senior technician specialized in non-destructive testing moved a high-resolution ultrasound scanner across the heavy-duty floor panels of Pit 3, the very area Sloan had claimed was too full to accommodate a single wheelchair. "Inspector!" The technician's voice echoed through the hollow chamber, sounding metallic and urgent. "We have a significant density anomaly. There's a void, a substantial one, directly beneath the main cargo rail. I've checked the Boeing 777-300ER technical schematics on my tablet. This void doesn't exist in the manufacturer's blueprint. This is a custom, aftermarket job." Reed knelt down, his gloved fingers tracing the seam of the reinforced flooring. "Open it. Now." The team didn't use finesse. Using a hydraulic pry bar and a pneumatic cutter, they bypassed the security bolts that had been cleverly disguised as standard airframe fasteners. With a groan of tortured metal, the team lifted a massive section of the floor. Beneath the primary structure lay a lead-lined compartment, professionally welded into the dead space between the hold floor and the exterior skin of the aircraft. Inside the hidden vault, the team found 12 heavy, Pelican-style tactical cases. They were sealed with tamper-evident wax and marked with a series of cryptic alphanumeric codes, that didn't correspond to any known airline tracking system. "Open the first one," Reed ordered, his breath visible in the chilled night air. When the heavy latches clicked open, the floodlights caught the brilliant, blinding glitter of something far more dangerous than antique furniture or vintage wine. The case was packed with hundreds of unregistered, high-grade industrial diamonds, nestled alongside a series of shielded microcircuitry components, the kind of specialized hardware used exclusively in the guidance systems of advanced ballistic missiles and long-range drones. The twist was as sickening as it was profound. Captain Sterling Sloan wasn't just a pilot with an overinflated ego and a penchant for bullying passengers. He was a high-level courier for a transnational smuggling syndicate. He had been using Richard Thorne's private cargo runs, which the CEO thought were merely for his own furniture and human trafficking, as a sophisticated shield for his own multi-million-dollar illicit operations. The cosmic irony was inescapable. By refusing to let Terrence Brooks board, Sloan hadn't just been protecting the CEO's defectors, he had been protecting his own side hustle. If Terrence's specialized wheelchair had been loaded into Pit 3, the ground crew would have been forced to deploy a specific tie-down configuration to secure the chair's weight. That configuration would have required the removal of the very floor panels that hid Sloan's fortune. To save his secret, Sloan had sacrificed Terrence's dignity, and in doing so, he had invited the very inspection that would destroy him. Less than an hour later, in a windowless, soundproof interrogation room at the Colnbrook Custody Center, Sterling Sloan sat across from Inspector Reed. The transformation was startling. The man who, 12 hours prior, had been sipping espresso at 40,000 feet and mocking a disabled man, was now a shivering wreck. His crisp, white pilot shirt was stained with sweat and grease from the cockpit arrest. His king of the sky aura had evaporated, replaced by the hollow, 1,000-yard stare of a man who realized he had just hit the mountain. "We found the diamonds, Sterling," Reed said, his voice a low, terrifying monotone. He tossed a high-resolution photograph of the lead-lined vault onto the metal table. "And more importantly, we found the encrypted satellite phone hidden in your flight bag. Our cyber unit has already decrypted the last 3 messages. They match the digital signature of a known weapons broker in Antwerp. You weren't just moving stones. You were moving restricted military tech." Sloan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing convulsively. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a pilot. I fly the plane. I don't look under the floorboards." "You did more than fly it," Reed countered, leaning forward until he was inches from Sloan's face. "The modification to that floor was done during a maintenance checkover in Singapore 6 months ago. We found the logbook entries you faked to cover the downtime. In the UK and the US, this isn't just a smuggling charge. This is classified as national security sabotage. You've aided in the transfer of restricted tech to hostile actors. You're looking at 30 years, Sterling. Minimum. No parole. You'll be 80 years old before you see a blade of grass that isn't inside a prison yard." Sloan's lower lip began to quiver. The arrogance that had fueled his liability comment to Terrence was gone. "It was supposed to be the last run," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "One more drop, and I was retiring to the Maldives. If that man in the wheelchair hadn't been so persistent. If he had just walked away." "That man," Reed interrupted, his voice like a sharp blade, "is a retired civil engineer. He spent his life ensuring the integrity of structures. He knew your cargo capacity excuse was a structural lie the moment you spoke it. You didn't just pick the wrong passenger to bully, Sterling. You picked the one man whose entire career was based on noticing things that don't add up. You thought you were the smartest man in the sky, but you were outplayed by a man in a chair." While Sloan was facing a life sentence in London, the karma was hitting Brenda Whitmore with equal relentless force in New York. She was no longer sitting in the comfort of a JFK break room. She was slumped on a wooden bench in a federal holding cell, the smell of stale coffee and fear clinging to her. As she waited for her court-appointed attorney, she wasn't visited by the Skylink legal team she expected. Instead, a grim-faced process server walked up to the bars and slid a thick stack of papers through the gap. "Brenda Whitmore, you're being served," the man said, his tone devoid of emotion. She looked at the documents with trembling hands. It wasn't just a criminal indictment. It was a massive personal liability lawsuit filed by Terrence Brooks, represented by his brother, Dominic. But there was more. Dominic's team had done what the airline never bothered to do. They had audited Brenda's personal finances. They discovered that Brenda hadn't just been following the captain's orders. She had been receiving priority loading bonuses from Sloan for over a year, kickbacks paid in cryptocurrency to ensure that certain special crates were never flagged or delayed. She had used that blood money to purchase a luxury condo in Long Island City and a fleet of high-end handbags, all on an airline agent's modest salary. The Internal Revenue Service, IRS, had already moved with surgical speed, freezing every single one of her accounts and placing a lien on her property. She wasn't just losing her job, she was losing every cent she had ever made from her years of cruelty and corruption. The media, hungry for a villain in the wake of the Skylink collapse, had already branded her the gatekeeper of greed. Her face was on every news cycle. Her "people like you" comment had become a rallying cry for disability rights activists globally. Every time she closed her eyes, she didn't see the luxury life she had built. She saw Terrence Brooks's calm, steady gaze at the gate, the man she thought she could erase with a single, petty no. Now his name was a household word for heroism, while hers was a synonym for corporate rot. The hard karma was no longer just a consequence. It was a total erasure of the world Brenda and Sloan had built. They had tried to ground a man they deemed lesser, only to find that he was the only thing keeping their world from falling apart. The final act of this corporate tragedy didn't take place in a boardroom or a cockpit. It unfolded in the heavy, sterile silence of a visitation room at HM Prison Belmarsh in London. This was a place for the forgotten, a grim fortress of concrete and steel that stood in stark contrast to the velvet-lined cabins of the Executive Express. Inside the room, the air was cold and smelled of industrial floor cleaner. Behind a thick pane of reinforced glass sat a man who had once believed he owned the horizon, Sterling Sloan, the man who had commanded Boeing 777s across the Atlantic with the casual arrogance of a god, was now reduced to a number. His crisp, tailored uniform, the one with the 4 gold stripes that demanded immediate respect, had been replaced by a shapeless, scratchy orange jumpsuit. His hair, once kept in a silver, military-era trim for the benefit of first-class passengers, was now thinning and matted. His skin, once bronzed by the sun of 1,000 flight decks, was a sickly, pale gray. The heavy steel door at the back of the room groaned open. The rhythmic, mechanical hum of an electric motor broke the silence, echoing off the cinder block walls. Terrence Brooks rolled into the room. He didn't look like a victim. He didn't look like a man who had been humiliated at a gate in New York. He wore a sharp, charcoal gray suit, his tie knotted with precision. He looked exactly like what he was, a retired civil engineer who understood that, for a structure to stand, its foundation had to be honest. Sloan didn't look up at first. He kept his eyes fixed on the scratched plastic tabletop, his fingers nervously picking at a loose thread on his sleeve. "Came to gloat?" he rasped. His voice, once used to deliver confident weather updates to hundreds of passengers, was now thin and cracked. "No," Terrence said, his voice calm, resonant, and unshakable. "I didn't come here for an apology. I know you aren't capable of giving one. I came to show you the result of your safety decision." Terrence reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, laminated photograph. He pressed it against the glass. It was a picture of his daughter, Sarah, on her graduation day. She was radiant, wearing her cap and gown, standing against the backdrop of the Tower Bridge. She was holding her diploma high, a smile on her face that could have lit up the entire Atlantic. "You told me I was a liability, Sterling," Terence said, his voice dropping to a low, steady rumble. "You told me the world moved too fast for people like me. You told me my equipment was a nuisance. But look at this photo. I made it. I didn't need your plane. I didn't need your permission. The United States government sent a private transport to ensure I didn't miss this moment. While you were being processed in a cell, I was sitting in the front row, watching my daughter become a doctor." Sloan finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with the dark circles of a man who hadn't slept since the day he landed at Stand 44. He looked at the photo, then at Terence. "The airline! It's all gone," he whispered, as if he still couldn't believe it. "Skylink is being liquidated. They're selling the planes for scrap. My pension, my legacy, wiped out in 48 hours. "I know," Terence replied. "My brother, Dominic, is the lead counsel for the creditors committee. He isn't just liquidating the assets, he's repurposing them. We're turning your old JFK hub, the one where you had me removed, into the Brooks Center. It will be the world's first specialized training facility for disability, advocacy, and inclusive engineering in aviation, your Executive Express route. It has been officially struck from the registry. The FAA has retired the number 88. It will never be used again. In the eyes of the aviation world, you and your flight have been erased." Sloan's face contorted with a sudden, desperate rage. He slammed his shackled hands against the glass, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the small room. "It was just a chair," he screamed, his voice echoing with the madness of a man who still refused to see his own fault. "If you had just been reasonable, if you had just taken the next flight or gone to a different gate, none of this would have happened. I was a captain. I was protecting the schedule. I was protecting the CEO's interests." Terence didn't flinch. He didn't move his chair back an inch. He simply watched the man on the other side of the glass unravel. "No, Sterling," Terence said, his voice cutting through Sloan's hysterics like a hot knife through wax. "You weren't protecting a schedule. You were protecting a lie. You were protecting the people you were smuggling. You were protecting those diamonds you had hidden under the floorboards. You didn't fall because of a wheelchair. You fell because you were carrying too much hate and too much greed in your cargo hold. You thought I was the weight that would slow you down, but it was your own corruption that dragged you out of the sky." Terence leaned closer to the glass, his expression one of profound, quiet pity. "You told me I should stick to the trains. Well, Sterling, I heard the news this morning. Since you've been stripped of your license and your citizenship is being challenged due to the smuggling charges, you'll be spending the next 30 years in a cell. The only thing you'll be commanding from now on is the schedule of your exercise hour." Sloan slumped back in his chair, the fire dying out of him as quickly as it had ignited. He looked broken, a hollow shell of the man who had once looked down on everyone from his cockpit throne. As Terence rolled out of the prison and into the cool London morning, the sun was beginning to burn through the fog. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a news alert from New York, a final confirmation that the world had indeed shifted on its axis. The headline read, "Final Judgment. Former Skylink CEO Richard Thorne sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Gate agent Brenda Whitmore's assets seized. Ordered to pay record-breaking restitution to Brooks' family." Brenda Whitmore, the woman who had smirked as she told Terence to stick to the trains, was now a cautionary tale. Her luxury condo, her designer clothes, and her illicit bonuses were gone. She was now working a minimum-wage job at a roadside motel, her name forever blacklisted from any industry involving travel or customer service. Every time she looked at a plane in the sky, she was reminded of the man she thought she could disappear with a single no. The route was shut down. The airline was a memory. The hard karma had come full circle, proving that in the end, The truth is the only thing that can truly fly. Terence Brooks looked up at a plane soaring high above a plane where every passenger, regardless of their ability, was treated with the dignity they deserved. He took a deep breath of the fresh air and started his motor. He had a graduation party to attend. This story is more than just a tale of a legal battle. It is a powerful testament to the fact that dignity is not a luxury, it is a fundamental human right. Terence Brooks's refusal to be silenced didn't just take down an arrogant pilot, it dismantled a corrupt corporate empire and changed the laws of the sky for generations to come. It serves as a stark reminder that when we stand up for our own worth, we are standing up for every person who has ever been told they are less than. The Brooks Rule now stands as a shield for millions of travelers, ensuring that no one is ever discarded like excess cargo again. If you found this story of justice and the ultimate power of karma inspiring, we want to hear from you. Like this video to help the algorithm show the world that prejudice has no place in our society. Share this story with your friends and family. Let's remind everyone that the underdog can and will win when the truth is on their side. Subscribe and hit that notification bell right now. We bring you the most intense, real-life stories of justice, corporate downfalls, and the hard-hitting karma that balances the scales of life. What do you think of Captain Sloan's final confrontation? Was Terence's visit the ultimate boss move? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one.